Why don't you take a look at these student speaking notes? Do you think they were effective? Unfortunately not. Most of the student speeches suffered because they didn't follow these important guidelines for developing speaking notes.
Each of you, well, most of you, will probably relate to what I'm going to say. Sorry, one second. Oh, okay. Each of you will probably relate to what I'm going to say today because most of the sources that I used and resources I used came from this campus.
One of the first guidelines for developing speaking notes has to do with the size of the note cards. Typically, you want your note cards to be about this size, which is 4 by 6 inches. 3 by 5 inches tends to be a little bit small and hard to read, and 5 by 7 tends to be a little large. Also, you probably want your note cards to either be white or some light pastel color. If you use bright colors, or especially if you use a variety of bright colors, it's extremely distracting for the audience. And you want your note cards not to be the focus of attention, so use a pale pastel or white. I also typically recommend that you only use a few note cards, maybe 1 or 2, though you may go up to as many as 5 or 6. I recommend 1 or 2 because it makes sure that then you don't just try to cram your formal outline onto your speaking note cards. And if you have a lot of speaking note cards, there's a real temptation just to cram it on there and then you end up reading it after all. There's another reason I recommend only a few note cards. If you have a lot of note cards, it's really easy to get lost. If there's just 1 or 2, you can't get lost. If you have a lot and you start getting nervous, you might end up getting your note cards out of order, and that's going to make you look disorganized and more nervous than you probably are. In addition, when you do your note cards, you want to use large font, or you want to write quite large so that you can look down easily. You want it to be very legible so you can glance down at your note cards for just a second, see the key idea, and then speak to the audience directly. You also want to use very short phrases, just a word or 2. You don't want to write out a sentence. It's just, remember, a word or 2 to trigger your memory, not to tell you exactly what you're supposed to say. Recognize that your speaking notes are really just a visual framework to remind you of what your outline is and what your speech is. It's just a little hint. It's not the whole thing.